Brownsville. Overflow packed with people. Wednesday night, something just happened in the service. It wasn't because things were bad or things were wrong or people weren't coming or the Spirit wasn't moving. To the contrary, we were all in an encouraged state of mind. But something just happened in the service. And I believe it's the fruit of secret prayer and people crying out and all-night prayer and people seeking the face of God and fasting and young people soaking their bed with tears. I believe God's been hearing and watching and looking. I sat in the service Wednesday night and something just hit me. It was out of the blue. It could have been the most wonderful night in the history of the revival, but something just hit me. I thought, what in the world am I doing here in church? Where something's supposed to be different. We're not just supposed to be having a revival service on Wednesday night. We're not just supposed to be having a moving of God. Something is supposed to break out. I turned to the brothers, to Pastor and Steve. I said, I feel like something's just supposed to break out tonight. I was going to get up and speak, so I began to speak, and they began to sense something happening. I made some announcements after I was done, talked about the need to get back to normal, talked about the need to break out and see the real things that God wants to do. I sat down, and Pastor and Steve had sensed God wanted to do something fresh. Pastor got up and said, we're just going to pray. We feel we need to go in a different direction. And we turned this night, this service into a time of prayer and crying out and going after God and seeking the face of God earnestly, saying, God, you've got to come in power. What we've seen has been wonderful. What we've seen has been glorious, but there's got to be more. And we're at a place of desperation. We're in a place that we can't live the way we're living anymore. Genesis 32 with Jacob, what happened? He got to a point where he could not go on the way he had been going anymore, and it hit suddenly. I don't know at what point he realized what was coming, but it hit suddenly. And I want you to recognize the state of desperation in Jacob. The push, the hunger, the desire that was within him. You've got to understand something. For those of you who've ever wrestled, for those of you who've ever been in that kind of heavy physical activity, you can't keep it up for long. It's not like some show on television, so-called wrestling match with performers. If you've ever seen Olympic level wrestling, the rounds are short because the energy that's put out is so great that you can only go on for a few minutes and that's it. And Jacob wrestles through the night. Why? Because he had no alternative. Because he had no other outlet, he had no other way. And all he could say was, I won't let you go because I can't let you go. If I let you go, I die. If I let you go, my family dies. That's holy desperation. The desperation that won't let go because it can't let go. Friends, we in America get so settled in. We in America, and from the prosperous nations of the world, we get so complacent. We get so lethargic. We learn to rely on our resources. And even in a heaven-sent revival like this, where there's not been a single service where anyone ever tried to concoct anything, where anyone ever tried to work anything up, where anyone ever tried to create an atmosphere other than what God was doing, not a single time in a single service. Still, we can get used to revival. And we can just keep thinking, well, God's going to move more. God's going to move more. America's going to be shaken. My city's going to be touched. My church is going to be touched. My loved ones are going to be saved. Healing power is going to come. But friends, unless a change comes in us, it's not going to change out there. Moses had one of the most awesome encounters with God of any human being. Probably of anyone who lived up to that point in history. He had the most awesome encounter with God of anyone. And he had an experience that most of us could not even relate to in our wildest dreams. Think of it for a minute. He went up the mountain with God at Mount Sinai. God spoke to him out of the mountain. He replied. All Israel saw it and heard it. And he spent 40 days alone with God. Consider it. He didn't eat. He didn't drink. It was supernatural. He lived in the glory for 40 days, 40 nights. He came down and saw the sin of his people. Came down and saw that they couldn't wait for him to return, and instead they'd made a golden calf. And now his judgment was on his people. and he had to move outside of the camp. He said to Moses, if I stay in the camp, the people will die. I'm going to have to judge them. So there was a tent that was set outside called the tent of meeting. And if anyone wanted to meet with God, they'd go outside the camp. They had to break away. They'd go outside the camp, and there the presence would be. And when Moses would go outside the camp, it says the cloud would come down in the tent. And all the Israelites would stand at the door of their tent and watch. It was amazing. Look at this. Moses is going out there, and the cloud comes down. Everyone just stop. Look, look, look. Moses and the Lord. And the Lord, it says, would speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. And you know what Moses prayed? He had been on Mount Sinai 40 days and 40 nights. He had been the one that had the encounter with God at the burning bush. He had been the one that raised the rod and saw the sea split. He'd seen the miracle power of God like no one else who ever lived. But now there's something in him in the midst of the glory, in the midst of the blessing, in the midst of the moving. There's something in him crying out for a greater revelation of God. There's something in him that has to break out and take hold of God. He can't live where he is any longer. He can't stay back any longer. And he says, oh God, show me your glory. I've got to have you and know you and experience you in a way beyond what I have yet. Friends, that's what it's going to take, that heart cry rising up to the throne of God. Listen to what John G. Lake said. I love to quote Lake and teach on Lake. Just last week in our School of Ministry, I taught our first-year class, Giants of the Faith, where we look at the lives of different ones God used through the ages, revivalists in the past and missionaries, and those used in healing, the power of God. And we talked about John Lake, a man mightily used by God to heal the sick. A man used by God in an extraordinary way in South Africa at the turn of this century, with miracles the likes of which hadn't been seen since the days of the apostles. But Lake came from a family. He was one of 16 children. His mother and father were healthy and strong people. But Lake's family had a curse of sickness and disease on it. By the time he was in his 20s, 8 of his brothers and sisters had died. Sickness, disease. One brother had suffered 22 years with a severe blood disorder and was an invalid on the edge of death. Another sister was dying of breast cancer. Another sister was terminally ill. Lake's wife had a degenerative heart condition that was going to kill her. Lake was sick, and his child was sick. And it was at that point that the cry of his heart went out to God for healing. It was at that point, after seeing all the destruction that had been wrought in his family, it was at that point, after seeing the devil steal and kill and destroy, that a cry rose up in him that was so intense that it had to receive an answer. And when the answer came down, it came down with a manifestation of power through his life, the likes of which very few of us have ever seen. And we just want to sit back and skip a day of food and maybe pray for an hour and read our Bibles a little bit here and there and turn off the TV maybe once or twice a week to meet with God more. And we think the glory is going to come down. Friends, let me ask you a question. How much room is there for God in your life? How much capacity is there for God in your life? We're not talking about save room for dessert, friends. We're talking about holy starvation. Listen to what Lake said. God's purposes come to pass when your heart and mind get the real God cry, and the real God prayer comes into our spirit, and the real God yearning gets hold of our nature. Something is going to happen then. No matter what your soul may be coveting, if it becomes the supreme cry of your life, not the secondary matter, or the third, or fourth, the fifth, or 10th, but the supreme desire of your soul, the paramount issue, all the powers and energies of your spirit, soul, and body are reaching out to God and crying to God for the answer. It is going to come. The hunger of a man's soul must be satisfied. It must be satisfied. It is a law of God in the depths of the Spirit. God will answer the heart that cries. God will answer the soul that asks.